Please help support the channel by visiting our Amazon store, affiliate link below. Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Matt Jarbo, this is 3 Buck Theater, and this is my review, my what I think of the Orville, Episode 4, If the Stars Should Appear. Now, coming off of last week's episode about a girl, it's hard to see where the show was going to go next. Last week's episode was so well done, so well crafted, and so Trek that it had many Trek fans saying this is quite literally the best thing since TNG, and Gene Roddenberry would have been proud. And of course, coming off of the mixed reactions to the Star Trek Discovery 2-episode pilot from this past weekend, you know, people were excited to see what the Orville was going to do. And in this episode, man, it just continues on from last week. Maybe not as poignant in its overall message, but it's definitely Trek, and it's definitely good. And there's a couple really solid jokes and character moments peppered throughout. Now, this episode was written by Seth MacFarlane, as was the last episode. And I know when it comes to writer's room on TV show, it really does boil down to a group effort. But this was definitely felt, but you could feel Seth was involved probably more than anybody else. So this episode is all about them encountering a gigantic floating vessel in the middle of space that's on a 6-month collision course with a star. It appears to be abandoned. It's 2,000 years old, and they are just wondering what the hell's going on with it. The engines are dead. There's no life forms on board, so they go and investigate. And inside, they basically discover that there is a whole ecosystem. There's a half-world theory going on there, or a half-world in a valley, where it's always daylight. The sun never doesn't shine, and people there are completely unfamiliar with any outsiders. In fact, hostile for the most part, with the exception of the Reformers, who are a group of kind of, you could say, resistance to the people who follow Jerald, who is their god, essentially. And this is where you kind of look at the plot line and you go, this has been done before, obviously. It's not a storyline that's wholly, unique. But being done by the Orville, it feels fresh. And it feels fresh in terms of how they portrayed it. So when they get there, it's, Ed, Kelly, Isaac, Claire, and Alana, or Alara, and they split off, right? So Isaac, Claire, and Ed head off one direction, Kelly and Alara go off in another, and this is where we get some great moments about character development, especially because Isaac is trying to understand the relationship dynamic between Ed and Kelly and what broke them up, what drove them apart. And then, of course, the other side of that is Alara asking Kelly essentially what happened, and Kelly gives a very poignant response. She basically says that Ed just was not there and he was distant, and that definitely pushed her away. And she regrets what she did, but she also claims that based upon the circumstances, it was inevitable, because you can't balance your home life and your work life. And I understand that. I do. I think that was such an amazingly poignant point to make about workaholics and people in adult relationships and how they balance work and home life and everything else. And I just really enjoyed that it was also a nice character moment between Alara and Kelly, because in the episode 2, when they were captured on the zoo, Alara's like, that's my friend, but you hadn't really gotten a lot of that camaraderie between the two women, and this was a great moment where it almost felt to me kind of like a little sister, big sister situation. And it was so sweet, just because it was like, she's kind of like, come on, tell me what's going on. Tell me what's going on, And Kelly was brutally honest about it. Didn't shy away from what she did. Didn't necessarily apologize for what she did. But she explains that this is something that, well, based upon the circumstances, was inevitable. And Ed's response to Isaac was also very similar, in the way he looked at that. And you could tell that they love each other. You could tell that they still love each other, but they understand that they're just not right together. Well, right now, clearly, they're taking the D train to Bonetown at some point during the season, and that's going to be funny to see as well. But when Isaac and Claire and Ed first encounter a home on the homestead, the father comes out with a gun, and Isaac shoots him, stuns him, and they go and talk to the family. And you find out that these people have never seen anyone like them before. They don't know who they are. They think they're from like the underground or the undercity, which is a plot point that never really gets ever mentioned past that. Also, the eternal daylight is something that I don't really, unless I missed the line of dialogue, wasn't ever mentioned in there. So there's a couple little things right off the bat in the world building of this ecosystem that they kind of like they mentioned, or it gets in there, but it doesn't necessarily hit. There were a couple jokes here and there that also did the same thing. Towards the end, some of the stuff with Ed making his jokes was kind of awkward and cringy, but I will talk about that. What I liked though about this was the son is kind of, you know, one of the reformers, and he takes them to go and meet the leader of the reformers to find out more of what's going on. And there was a whole gag in there, like they feed him like corn on the cob and something else, and Ed tries to eat it, but we don't really see what it is because it just looks like normal frontier food, and it's really gross, but he does a polite thing like, oh, this is delicious. Do you have a napkin? Oh, do you have a garbage can? Right? Things like that. And it was, again, one of those jokes that kind of fell flat, but not to take away from the overall awesomeness of the show. You know, some jokes hit, and I will talk about those by the end. But so then, yeah, Kelly and Alara get approached by enforcers, like the thugs of the leader of Jerald, you know, and they end up shooting Alara in the chest. And I'm thinking she's probably going to survive because she's Solarian, and you know she's stronger and faster and everything else. But she took 3 slugs to the chest. They kidnap Kelly, take her off towards the city. Ed and everyone shows up to basically help Alara get her back on her feet, and while Kelly is now being tortured by the leader of the Jeraldians, whatever you want to call them, the people in the city, you know, who worship the sun, worship Jerald, and don't want any kind of naysayers, and they handle that in a way that you would never see on a Star Trek show, right? You would never see it in the way they did it, which was the priest whose name I forget right now gets them all riled up, right? The guy in charge gets them all riled up, and then says this man is basically a heretic, do with him what you will, and shoves him in the crowd, and they beat him to death. So then when Kelly, you know, basically confronts him about that, he says, she's like, you killed him. He's like, do you see, I didn't kill him, they killed him. There's no blood on my hands, which was such an interesting way, because it shows you how these cult leaders operate. They get people riled up, they get them to act, and then they go, oh, I did nothing, right? Which I thought was interesting. And then the whole time they're trying to get information out of her, and she's just like talking all sorts of crap, you know. She basically tells, he's like, where are your friends? And she's like, oh, they're at a little coffee shop in Soho called Central Perk, you know, just please don't hurt the monkey. So she drops a Friends reference that worked in the scene. It was pretty damn funny. Then of course, you know, Ed and Claire and Alara, they dress up like the people there because they look a little different. They have different spots on their faces and everything, and they go in there to rescue her. But there's a great moment on the way up where Ed's like, I'm going to improvise my way in, and so he pulls the whole like, hey, Nick. Yeah, Nick, I know you, you know. And the guard's like, who the hell are you? And he's like, come in for a hug, buddy. And he pulls out the gun and he stuns him. And the guy falls, you know. And it was a good moment. It was pretty funny. It was actually legitimately good, you know, humor in that moment, because just the way that Seth MacFarlane handled it shows that he, for one, takes it very seriously. Not only the writing, but the acting, trying to commit to the part, commit to the gags. You know, you could see where there was like maybe a little bit of jarringness in the first episode or two, trying to set the humor, and then now they're kind of hitting their stride right out the gate, and they're on episode 4 and they're hitting their stride, which is amazing to me. It also makes me deeply afraid that Fox is going to cancel the damn show, because this is kind of what Fox does, right? This is kind of what Fox does. Something gets good and they want to kill it, and this episode did feel a little bit like something you might see on Firefly as well, which I thought was a pretty cool little thing. But that being said, they go in there, they rescue Kelly, and they tell the guy in charge, hey, like, your ship is on a collision course, you know, with this star, you're all going to be dead in 6 months, we can save you. And the guy goes like, nah, you know, just whatever, I'm not going to listen to these blasphemers, basically, you know, trying to protect his own ego, even though you can tell that he has some belief that there's something else out there, that it's not all what it seems, you know, which I thought was interesting too, because they go through this other hatch that Isaac's able to open. They come across the command room where the commander pops up on screen, the former commander, and it's Liam Neeson in a cameo. Right, that was great, and like that was what I loved about this too, is there was no Liam Neeson shots in the promos for this. It was straight up a Liam Neeson cameo. That it's like, you know, he just talks about what happened, that they've been adrift for 200 years, and that the ecosystem can sustain them for thousands of years, and then they basically just forgot who they are. And I think, again, that was kind of a poignant part of the old saying of, you know, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And there was a line Kelly says, too, about how even some humans' view of Earth's history is fuzzy because of so much time has passed since it transpired. And so how we view things and are sometimes muddied and not the most accurate or crystal clear. And so it was a good line about how we shouldn't forget our history no matter what. And I did like that. I mean, it was a kind of maybe a throwaway line to other people, but for me, that definitely kind of boiled back down to the whole concept of, for those who don't, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And this particular, colony essentially had gone through so many cycles of, birth and death, that they just forgot where they came from because they were locked in there and no one could get out. And then, of course, we get to the part that's kind of causing a little bit of division amongst fans, which is when comparing to Star Trek, you had the Prime Directive, which, for lack of a better term, like kind of don't mess around and stuff. Like their observe, report, don't change anyone's life. Well, here you've got this moment where they discover that basically there's a sunroof on top of the ship, which also earlier on too, this is pretty good. And this is where Seth MacFarlane really kind of brought some interesting philosophy to this, where he had said, oh, here's our ship, the Orville. See how cool it's all rounded is. And then he shows their ship. Like you see, like it's like a turtle, and it's kind of like the world tortoise theory or the world turtle theory, which is a half Earth on top of, the Earth is a half Earth on top of a tortoise shell, or it's a tortoise shell. It's an old philosophy that we've seen in different religions throughout the centuries, and so it kind of takes in like different animals as well, but it's just the world turtle theory. I recommend you guys look into it. It's pretty cool. So like again, one of those little kind of like subtle references of old that you wouldn't expect to see in a show like this pops up, And so they open back, the sunroof, showing nighttime for the first time these people have ever seen night. And, even the priest looks up at it and he kind of gives a sigh of relief, that they're not alone. So they are not altering the people there. They're not altering the civilization inside of this, construct of this building, this ecosystem, but they are giving power to the reformers over the other people that were using torture and intimidation and fear to maintain control, which I thought was maybe not part of what could be considered their prime directive. But there was a great comment on Reddit saying, well, their original mission was not what this was. So their original mission, their original idea, their original actions were already screwed up. So this was just kind of resetting the course, which might be considered what might fall under the prime directive essentially. So I thought that was really cool as well. The episode as a whole, just fantastic. It was just fantastic. It wasn't focused on one particular character. I thought originally it was going to be like an Isaac episode, because, we've been kind of going through a little bit. Last week was about Bortus. Week before that was about Alara. This time I thought it was going to be Isaac. I'm like, cool, we get to know more about Isaac and stuff, because I think he's a cool character and I really want to know more. Well, it wasn't. It didn't really focus on one specific character. It was a continuation of last week, especially in the opening, because the opening, and this is why I wanted to hold off on talking about this till the end. The opening was brilliantly fantastic, in my opinion, because it starts off with Clyden and Bortus in bed, and Clyden is awake, right? And he's like, Bortus, I need to talk. And Bortus is like, Clyden, I have to work in the morning. What do you want? Right? And it's basically this relationship discussion, right? They have the baby, and Bortus is working. Clyden's home with the baby all the time, and Clyden wants some attention. Clyden wants some love, doesn't want to be neglected. And again, that theme did kind of flow into the conversation about Kelly and Ed later on, but it was so funny because Clyden gets up, Bortus gets up and he's going to go to work, start a shift early because he's already awake. And then Clyden goes out and goes to the food replicator and says, like, I need basically comfort food. And then he's like, what do you suggest? And the computer says, well, we have ice cream. And he's like, okay, what kind of ice cream? And she's like, for depression, Rocky Road ice cream, which I thought was fantastic. And then Clyden gets a bowl of Rocky Road, walks over to the TV and says, turn on something that will make me happy. And the sound of music pops on, and it's the I Am 16 going on 17-bit. And he starts watching it, smiling and eating his Rocky Road. And then Bortus comes out in his full uniform, and they just look at each other and they don't say anything, but you could just sense the animosity. You could just sense everything. And then Bortus just kind of turns and walks out. And it was just a great moment about relationships, because I think we've all been in those, right? Just the fact that it was between the Mocklins and some people have said, I was reading some comments about this too, saying like, it's interesting that that's what Clyden went to. Well, Clyden, as we learned in the last episode, was born a female, but then given gender reassignment surgery to become a male. So you have to ask yourself, is this also kind of like nature versus nurture, femininity versus masculinity? Will there be any kind of sub-traits that do eventually, or dormant traits that eventually come out in moments of high stress? I mean, granted, that's not something that was explored, but just when I was watching it, that's kind of what I took from it. I also really enjoyed Gordon and Lee just talking trash to each other on the bridge of the ship, you know, about like, oh, we're mapping stars, this is so boring. And then they start trying to one-up each other. But then, of course, they end up getting called away to go fight the Krill, and they end up like, you know, Gordon does some sick maneuvers, and Lee helps, ends up basically taking out the ship. There's some good targeting, and then Lee jumps up and he's like, boom, bitch. Like, it just felt so refreshing to see something as funny as that. Like, his reaction was just of pure excitement, like, yeah, son, I got them, you know. And then Bortus kind of gives him some crap, but then still commends him. He sits down, and then Gordon looks at him and he's just like, yeah, you got this, bro. Good job. So what I love is they're building camaraderie between the characters, and they're kind of, you know, you've got Kelly and you've got Alara. They're bonding. We already know about that. Ed is trying to, you know, like, he has a relationship with Claire that they're trying to work on in terms of her being the doctor and everything else. And you've got Bortus and Clyden, which I think is a great relationship. You've got Isaac there, who's just curious and always asking questions about human sexuality and human relationships. Like, there's a great line when they're trying to talk about, you know, guiding a shuttle to the ship to board it, and Isaac goes, well, I'm the only one here who can perform the calculations necessary or the movements necessary to dock us. And Gordon, being, you know, as brazen as he is as being this pilot, it's like, we don't have to be a dick about it. And then Isaac goes, what is dick? and then Ed just goes back over to his console, goes boop 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 boop. He's like, check your screen. I love that he responds back with, what is dick? And then actually they don't tell him to shut up. They actually go and they explain it to him to further help his education. It's those little details in the show that I really love, because I feel like it's building to this world. And as we're 4 episodes in, and I think there's 13 episodes in the season, I really want them all to be out right now so I can binge watch them a couple times, because of how much I truly love this show. And then I'm also worried that moving it from Sunday to Thursday is going to have an impact on the ratings. And that's only going to cause Fox to not continue with the series and to not give us a second season. And I hope that Trek fans and non-Trek fans and Seth, you know, Family Guy fans and non-Family Guy fans who come across this show don't listen to the critics that unfairly bashed it. Listen to the fans that are, like, you know, talking about the show and looking at it from the perspective of being the closest thing to the next generation, or a successor to the next generation, than we've ever gotten before, that actually has an optimistic view of humanity in the world at large, and wanting to explore and not wanting to change things, but just understand things. And also some slapstick dick jokes. And it's just how it all works. It's just how it all works. And it's fantastic. And all I can say is, I just love this goddamn show. But I want to know what you guys think about this. Let me know in the comments below. My name is, of course, Matt Jarbo. This has been 3 Buck Theater. Be sure to check back next week for my review of episode 5 of the Orville. And I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day. Peace out.